Hi everyone! In this video, we'll review the assignments for week 4. But before we do that, I think it's worth reviewing the concepts of tenor and vehicle to build on our understanding of how figurative language works in poetry. Remember, the concepts of tenor and vehicle apply only to metaphors and similes, which compare two different things. But even though metaphors and similes essentially serve the same function, making a comparison, they are different. Simile suggests that something is only like something else, such as there is no frigate like a book. Here, the poet compares a frigate or a warship to a book. She is suggesting that the frigate or warship is like a book, but not the same as a book. Metaphors, however, suggest that something is something else, such as hope is the thing with feathers. In this line, the poet compares hope to a thing with feathers or a bird. She is suggesting that hope is the same thing as a bird. But let's get back to the tenor and vehicle. The best way to review the tenor and vehicle is to, of course, look at a poem and focus on the figurative language or comparisons made. So let's read William Wordsworth's She Dwelt Among the Untrodden Ways. She dwelt among the untrodden ways, beside the springs of Dove. A maid whom there were none to praise, and very few to love. A violet by a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye, fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. She lived unknown and few could know, when Lucy ceased to be. But she is in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. Now let's stop for a moment and consider the poet's use of figurative language. I'm going to focus on the second stanza here because this second stanza is so filled with two very significant comparisons. So we have a violet by a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye, and we have fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. So here we have two comparisons being made. The first here is a violet by a mossy stone. And I'm going to highlight this. We have a violet by a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye. So I suggest that there is a comparison here. First, we have a violet by a mossy stone that is half hidden from the eye. But what is that violet, that flower, being compared to? Well, if we look above to the stanza above it, we see that Wordsworth ends the first stanza with a colon. And a colon is actually suggesting that whatever comes next is an example of what was said in the first stanza. So in the first stanza, Wordsworth was talking about a she, a maid. Now in Wordsworth's time, the word maid meant a young unmarried woman. So he's talking about a young unmarried woman. And by the time we get to the third stanza, we see that the woman has a name, and her name is, and I'll highlight it, her name is Lucy. So when we get in the second stanza, a violet by a mossy stone half hidden from the eye, now we can guess, it's a very educated guess, that Wordsworth, the speaker here, is talking about Lucy. He's comparing Lucy, who is the subject of the poem, to a violet. And then Wordsworth gives us a little bit more, some characteristics about the violet. He tells us it's by a mossy stone, and that mossy stone is half hidden from the eye. So in the case of these two lines here, the tenor is the object being described in the poem. The tenor is actually the subject of these lines or the subject of the poem. So here in this case, in the comparison of a violet and Lucy, the tenor is Lucy, because that's who the poet is really talking about. He's not talking about a violet throughout the poem. He's talking about Lucy. And the vehicle would be that violet, would be that flower. It may be helpful to keep in mind that the word metaphor means to carry over. And we can use a vehicle to carry over traits to the tenor or the subject of the poem. Now, the way that a metaphor and simile works, in this case we have a metaphor because Wordsworth doesn't use the word like or as when making the comparison. He simply states that that Lucy is, and we can add on the words Lucy is a violet by a mossy stone half hidden from the eye. So metaphors like a violet by a mossy stone half hidden from the eye, this metaphor here, and also similes, create deep layers of meaning in poetry because we as readers instinctively carry over the traits of the vehicle to the tenor. So I'm going to fill in this T chart to demonstrate our thinking process when we approach figurative language in these lines. So we have Lucy as the tenor and Violet. So now we have to think about all of the traits of a violet to see what Wordsworth's really saying about Lucy here. So he tells us some things. He says that the violet is by a mossy stone. He also tells us that violet is half hidden from the eye or from other people. So a violet is also a flower. It's lavender in color. It smells sweet, beautiful, but the beauty fades. The beauty fades quickly. So these are all the things that he's suggesting about Lucy. It's also a violet is also very fragile in its beauty. It could be easily broken. It could die easily. So he's suggesting all of these things about Lucy, that she's beautiful, but her beauty is fragile. It fades. She's half hidden. She's by the stone, and the stone is a mossy stone. It's not just any kind of stone, it's a mossy stone. So the stone itself is hidden. So there's a lot of hiding here. And as we go to the third stanza, this all begins to make sense because the speaker says that Lucy lived unknown and few could know, few knew her because she was hidden. Now she was either hidden by choice, maybe she wanted to be alone and left alone, or maybe she was shunned by society. The speaker just doesn't give us enough information for us to know what exactly is the circumstances here with Lucy. But the speaker does tell us when Lucy ceased to be, and she's also in her grave. So Lucy died. Her beauty did fade. Okay, so that's the process. That's the thinking process that goes on when we encounter a metaphor or a simile. So now that we've reviewed this concept of a tenor and a vehicle, I think you'll be able to use these concepts to give you a better understanding of how figurative language works, but also to give you a better understanding of the poems themselves, right? So for week 4, you're going to be moving to a different set of poetic devices to give you more tools in your toolbox to help you to understand these romantic poems. You'll be looking at symbolism, apostrophe, and allusion. So for this week, you are going to take quiz 4. So quiz 4 asks you to first watch these videos on symbolism, apostrophe, and allusion, and then respond to these 5 questions by the end of the day on September 21st. So next we have discussion forum 3. And for this discussion forum, you'll choose one of the following poems: Percy Shelley's Ozymandias, George Gordon Lord Byron's She Walks in Beauty, or John Keats's When I Have Fears. And to access the poem, simply click on the titles. So after making your choice of which poem you'd like to write about the ways in which the poet uses one of the following poetic devices: symbolism, apostrophe, or allusion. And in your response, follow these guidelines. So first, pull out a specific example of that poetic device you chose, directly quoting 1 or 2 lines. Then explain the relevance of the quotation. Let your peers understand the significance of the quotation, why you chose it as an example of the poetic device. You can do this by pointing to specific words and phrases in the quotation and explaining how these words and phrases illustrate that poetic device you're writing about. So your main post is due by the end of the day on September 22nd, and your reply is due by the end of the day on September 23rd. Then lastly, you have a poetry activity called Strange Companions, and you'll be reading William Blake's The Lamb and the Tiger, these 2 poems, for you to complete this activity. So often these 2 poems, The Lamb and the Tiger, are read together. However, both poems were included in separate poetry collections. The Lamb was included in a collection entitled Songs of Innocence, while the tiger was included in a collection called Songs of Experience. And yet there is something about these poems that call us to read them together. So to complete the activity, follow the guidelines. What comes to mind when you see this image for number 1? What comes to mind when you see this image for number 2? And then respond to the next questions 3, 4, and 5 by the end of the day on September 23rd. So if you have any questions or concerns, please email them to me, or you can post them in the class questions forum. Also, please stop by during my virtual hour on Thursday. For this week only, the office hour will be from 2 to 3 p.m. That's it, everyone. Enjoy your week. Bye now.